Is this thing on? Welcome back to Big Mouth, and fancy seeing you here in June. I'm very welcome, my friends, and especially my enemies. Come in, sit down, no touching. I don't do the touching. Hello and welcome back to Big Mouth, and you can keep this or any other conversation I ignite going over on my Twitter at Movies TV Mad, my Vero at Big Mouth 1, and the extension to this channel, give or take the odd ball video, right, is my Instagram, Big Mouth. Hello and welcome to Friday's edition of the dceu Daily. Yes, 5 days from Christmas. I'm sorry if you don't celebrate it, but it's the most wonderful time of the year and I love it. And I'm in the UK to spend it with my nieces and nephews. That's fun, but it's difficult to do these videos, but nothing's going to stop me. And certainly nothing's going to stop me today. Right, I want to do something a little bit different today. I want to compare the Batman v Superman Justice League situation to the Last Jedi Rise of Skywalker situation, because they are stark parallels. Now, before anyone starts, I'm not one of these DCEU fans who's going to say, ooh, The Last Jedi was such a good film. Why don't people get it? They're treating Rian Johnson like they did Zack Snyder. Well, they are treating Rian Johnson like they did Zack Snyder, but I think that Rian Johnson really didn't help himself, not in terms of what he wanted to do with the film, but in terms how he came out and spoke on social media. Now, he has every right to defend himself. Now, Zack Snyder was able not to get into those fights, and he could have. He had an account on Twitter. He could have defended himself, but he didn't feel he had to. He made the film along with Chris Terrio and David Goyer. They did the film they wanted to do. They were given the freedom to make that film, and they didn't feel they had to defend themselves. And I agree with that. Now, in terms of what happened with BVS and Justice League, it's still kind of, the BVS and The Last Jedi, to me, are very different films. BVS is a DC film that DC fans didn't ask for, and I'm talking about hardcore DC fans, but it's still a very, very good, compelling movie. It's trying to excite its audience. It's telling a story, and ultimately, there are epic moments. There's beautiful, compelling narratives. I don't believe The Last Jedi does that, and I believe the complaints in terms of making it underwhelming, trying to, having twists and turns and surprising an audience is brilliant. But when you try and do like Johnson did with The Last Jedi, which was underwhelm the audience with the twists weren't exciting twists, and I've said this before. By the end of the film, where his message is, the Force is for everyone, and everyone can be a Force giver, look, we know that's very, very partisan, very ultra-left. That's, everyone's special. And I agree with that. But the point is, we already knew from the previous movies that not everyone can be a Force giver. You can't just go boom and change it because you want to push a political narrative of kindness. We all want people to have the same opportunities in life, but you can't have that comparability with the Force in Star Wars. But The Last Jedi isn't really Rian Johnson's fault. The Last Jedi situation was J.J. Abrams and Kathleen Kennedy's fault, because J.J. Abrams should have done the trilogy. If J.J. Abrams did did his Star Wars universe continuing, from Return of the Jedi like he wanted to do, and did all the 3 films, there wouldn't have been an issue here. And I've said this before, right, and it may be boring because it's repetitive, right? But it's a true statement. So you've now got The Last Jedi, then you've got The Rise of Skywalker trying to fix the so-called problems of The Last Jedi. Now, this is very, very similar to what happened with Batman v Superman going over to Justice League. But I think what Warner Brothers did is a lot worse than what Disney and Lucasfilm have done. In terms of the reactive kind of studio thing that they did, they kind of had Zack there because Rian Johnson left. He was never going to do the 3rd film, right? So it's a different parallel, but the same parallel. So what Warner Brothers did, right? No, Zack, we don't want this. Try again. Zack, we don't want this. Try again, right? Zack spoke about the scary idea. In the end, they have to part company because Zack's not willing to compromise. So he goes. Then they tell the biggest of lies, that Zack left because of the death of Autumn, his daughter. Not true. So the lies began. Then we had Joss Whedon come in. Then he brought, he was bringing his own people. He literally reshot the whole movie. We didn't know that at the time. It's pretty much a brand new movie. Give or take the odd Snyder sequence, but it's not Snyder's film, and Snyder's admitted that. So what they did was they instead of saying to Zack Snyder after BVS, no, right, don't go into production, or halt the production a couple of scenes and say, nah, we're going to do something else. Sorry, Zack, thank you. And that would have been what they did. Was they had Zack there for ages and said, you know what, Zack, this isn't going to work. And then they brought in Joss Whedon, because they said, right, Joss, you have to do everything on the same schedule that Zack had. And Joss is thinking, oh my God. So that element isn't Joss Whedon's fault. So it was a mess in the end. Now, there's a comparability here because of the fallout and the divide between fans about The Last Jedi, the same thing happened. So they were going to have another director come in for Rise of Skywalker, or whatever they were going to call it, right? And that didn't happen. They brought Colin Trevorrow in, the director of the modern day Jurassic Park movies, and then they got rid of him. Again, I think they were worried. They didn't know what to do. So in the end, JJ, who should have been there all along for all three movies, came back, right? He did the first movie. He knew what he wanted to do, but he lost the middle movie. He lost the middle movie, and that was the problem, right? So he had to kind of make a movie coming on from a movie that shut everything off. That's what The Last Jedi does. It is not a typical second chapter of a movie. Rian Johnson took that film, made it his own, made it standalone, made it self-contained, and the only dribbling he left was that the First Order or the Last Order, whatever you call them, are out there and they're still a threat, and the battle goes on. But there's no cliffhanger. There's no threads left. Luke Skywalker is literally now dead. Rey's got to carry on doing what she's doing. They've told us that she's nothing special. There's nothing literally to get excited about, but they do tell us that the Force is for everyone. So there's a little positive message there, but it isn't a second chapter of a trilogy. And this is the difference between The Last Jedi and Batman v Superman. Whether you like Batman v Superman or not, it leads you to a massive cliffhanger, a compelling journey, beautifully threaded narratives that can continue on and on in the next chapters, in the next movies. I think the problem with The Last Jedi is it was a very underwhelming chapter. But when they brought in Rian Johnson, they knew what kind of filmmaker Rian Johnson was. Rian Johnson wanted to change Star Wars. That's what he wanted to do. Now, how they thought there weren't going to be resistance, because Star Wars fans are notoriously very different to what they all want. They all want different things, right? I'm a Star Wars fan. Now, I love the characters. I love the spaceships. I love the lasers. I love Yoda. I love all of it, right? So what Rian Johnson tried to do was do something else. And, talking about withholding people's expectations, basically, we were in the wrong because we saw what JJ was doing. We assumed there'll be a little bit of that in Rian Johnson's middle movie. It's a bit like Doctor Who going from Russell T Davies to Stephen Moffat. Any thread that Russell had was dead, right? And Stephen just came in and did his own thing. And for me, that was a problem. As much as I loved season 5, I thought that was a problem because I loved what RTD did, but that's it. That's the end. It's like you're dealing with two different franchises. And this is what Rian Johnson did. But when you go back to Batman v Superman, the narratives continue that they set up in Man of Steel. Now, the difference is, of course, between Zack Snyder and Rian Johnson. Zack was there from the very beginning. We talk about this 5-movie arc he was planning. So we knew that all along. Rian came into a middle movie, made a self-contained movie, left and just let the explosion in the rubble go on around him. For me, The Last Jedi is a problematic film because it's just everything that's done to it. You kill off Snoke. You kill off Snoke, but he's the principal villain. You've killed him. What now? What can you do? There's nothing there. What can you do for a third film? There was no fault that he was involved in a franchise. And this is why I said Rian should have just done one of the Star Wars stories, which were self-contained, but still really had threads of the Skywalker saga. So then what they tried to do was, they tried to say, right, the Rise of Skywalker is this massive endgame event, right? It's the culmination, it's the conclusion of the Skywalker saga. It is not. That is not true. That's what they made it to be. But the Skywalker saga concluded in Return of the Jedi. George Lucas had a 7, 8 and 9, but it wasn't, yes, he was going to have Luke and Han and Leia and all there, but it was a next chapter, you know. They were older. They had kids. It was going to be very interesting and very exciting. So it wasn't 7, 8 and 9, George Lucas's 7, 8 and 9 wasn't a conclusion of the Sky. It could have been to a point, but that chapter was concluded with Return of the Jedi. But Disney and J.J. Abrams didn't know what to do because Johnson had sewn everything up so neatly, and you kind of thought, wow, that's Star Wars. I'm not excited anymore. I can't even have the heart to watch the older films now. He's killed it. There's nothing exciting there, right? And this was the problem with Rian Johnson. And this is a video for just coming in, right, comparing Batman v Superman and Justice League to the calamity that is The Last Jedi and what J.J. Abrams had to kind of sort out with The Rise of Skywalker. So there's, you know, The Last Jedi really killed the fandom. Now, Batman v Superman may not be your type of movie, but it was part of a plan. It's the middle part of a trilogy. It's exciting. It's dark. As I say, it's got beautiful narrative threads in it, but The Last Jedi really hasn't got much to it. It's got a beautiful fight with Kylo Ren and Rey and you know and Snoke's guards in the throne room. That's also one of the great cinematic scenes. I agree, but you can't. Well, you can call it a great movie if, from your point of view, that you think that the threads in this film, the narrative threads in this film, and you know, sewing everything up so neatly in a middle chapter is good and it excites you for the third movie. But literally, Rian Johnson and you know J.J. Abrams hardly had any communication. It's not like they sat down and had a plan from The Force Awakens and said, right, Ryan, I'm doing this. What are you going to do? And then JJ could have said, well, can we think about this? They should have been working together, but there wasn't. JJ did The Force Awakens, went off. It's still Bad Robot. Bad Robot was, his production company was still involved, but there was no communication. In fact, JJ Abrams laughed when he read that he killed off Snoke. It was a mess. There was no communication. And I think I'm doing this video just to show you how Hollywood never learns its lesson. They don't understand where they are now, what era, what age they're in. They know that the internet's there. They know we're clever and smart, and we understand what we want. And this is the argument that started with The Last Jedi and Batman v Superman. Should you be making movies to please mainstream fandom, or should you follow through on your vision, good, bad, or indifferent? This is the difficulty. Let me be clear here. I love Zack Snyder. I love BVS. I love MOS. But when you're talking about mainstream and franchises like DC and Star Wars, it's a very dangerous game to play to start saying, right, I'm going to rewrite the fabric of what these people are. And if you don't like it, it's tough. You are in a consumer industry. And your main aim is to make something that consumer wants to come in. Now, if you make something that they like, right, then they're going to come in. You're going to make money as a studio. Now, there is places for people like Zack Snyder and Rian Johnson. Absolutely. I like what Zack Snyder did. I want to be clear here. I love the DCEU. I loved what he did. But ultimately, and this is why Hollywood don't think outside the box, let me give you a what if here. What if Zack Snyder never came in to do the DCEU? That would be a sad world, right? But what if Warner Brothers said to him, right, we want you, Zack, to create a new superhero universe and make your own superhero story. Imagine how awesome that would have been. And then DC could be like the hardcore mainstream fans wanted it to be, and then we would have had an epic. So what happens is when you bring in these creatives who want to change what it means for a film to be a superhero movie and what it means to be Star Wars, you've got a problem. As I say, I love Zack's DC vision. There are elements of DC Comics, it's all there anyway, but people reacted badly to it for whatever reason, right? But people like Zack Snyder could create their own superheroes, their own superhero universe, right? But then you could still have DC doing what people want it to do. But studios don't think outside the box. So there became this conversation after The Last Jedi and Batman v Superman. Who's right? The fans or the studios or the creatives who are doing things their way? And there's not a right or wrong answer here. But ultimately, when you're dealing with a consumer business, then you've got to think about the consumer. Because if you're not, what are we all here for? There's ways to integrate people like Zack Snyder and Rian Johnson to do their own thing, right? And then alongside their own thing, you bring in people to do things that people want to see. Ultimately, DC movies and Star Wars movies are a high consumer blockbuster platform that you want to make as much money and generate as much excitement as you can from it. And as I say, what Zack Snyder did with Man of Steel and Batman v Superman is beautiful, and I'm sure his cut of Justice League is going to be epic, violent, and compelling. Now, moving on from what I've just been talking about, and my conclusion to all this is that studios need to think carefully. Because of what happened with Batman v Superman, whether you loved it or not, they decided they had to course correct, and that's where the Justice League mess comes from. And because of the reactions to the Last Jedi, then there were different things going on with the Rise of Skywalker, where JJ had this plan. He had this 3-hour epic planned. He did. It's obvious, right? And they cut it. They made him reshoot it. There's a brilliant director's cut out there of The Rise of Skywalker as well. One of the criticisms I'm hearing is it's too rushed. It's too patched together. That's because they sent him back to the drawing board too many times, because studios don't understand movie making. Then you're going to throw the MCU at my face. Well, the MCU is run by someone, not only a really good production bureaucrat, but a great storyteller. He's a great mixed element, Kevin Feige. And when the MCU's been good, that's how he got it right. Common sense decisions. And Disney, up to Infinity War, weren't getting involved. All of a sudden now, I can even tell with the MCU that Kevin's having problems with Disney. They want to get involved. And studio bureaucrats don't understand consumers and what they want. And they're all very political these days, as we already know. That's why there's been so many flops this year, because their main focus isn't storytelling and entertainment. So yesterday I spoke about the severed head of Steppenwolf not being in the Snyder Cut. Of course I was wrong. I thought that was the thing Zack couldn't do, but then I remember there were pictures of this. And he reminded us of this yesterday on Vero, and we saw the severed head. Listen, if that's there, I'm happy about that. I don't know what design of Steppenwolf we're getting. You don't, but Zack has made it ultimately clear that the 214 is a thing. That's what he wants us to fight for. And before I go in the next couple of minutes, I want to talk about what's ahead for 2020. And what's ahead for 2020 is the fight continues. We haven't got the Snyder Cut yet. We have reached a great place in the battle to get the Snyder Cut released. But let's be clear. There is not a $40 million budget needed to complete the film, right? If it needs polishing up here and there, I won't argue with that, but not 40 million. The 214 minutes is real. I don't care if you keep on saying you've spoken to special effects people, or it's not real because someone's told you. The only person, unless Zack Snyder's told you 214 isn't real, then you're wrong. You're mistaken, or you have an agenda, and you're lying. So what do you think about what we've discussed today? Do you think there's a comparability between what happened with Batman v Superman and Justice League versus The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker? I thought, as everyone's talking about those films, I thought we'd have a comparison video today, and I think it worked out well. But you can let me know your reactions to the video. Please comment, like, share. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already, and please share the channel as well. And I'll be back tomorrow with more DCEU Daily.